So this chart shows how APS would dispatch resources in 2050 for the business as usual case. We show 12 days of operations with each day representing a different month. This looks very similar to today's system, where we have a nuclear baseload plant, load following and peaker gas plants, and a small amount of renewable energy. This work of art shows how we would dispatch the resources in our net zero case. You can see that outside of the summer months, the system is 100% wind and solar during the daytime. While to meet that higher summer load, we have to use our full capacity of nuclear, carbon capture, and use that hybrid fuel peaker plant more often. And finally, this is our dispatch for 100% renewables, where the reliance on wind is clear. In the summer months, wind output is down and the overall demand is up, so we do have to use that hybrid fuel plant much more often. In the remainder of the year, we have an excess of wind that we use to produce hydrogen. This is especially the case in the spring, where the wind and solar output are both high, so it's cost effective to increase our peak load from the normal 12.5 gigawatts in the summer to about 15 gigawatts to produce hydrogen. And here we show the emissions trajectory for each scenario between 2022 and 2050. Retiring our coal plants reduces our emissions intensity substantially by 2030, but as we add more natural gas in business as usual, our total emissions begins rising again, and it exceeds 10 million tons in 2050. Both net zero and 100% renewables have steep emissions reductions. However, in the 100% renewable case, we're actually keeping our natural gas plants online and emitting longer before we switch to biogas to reduce the overall cost. Whereas in the net zero case, we can just convert these plants to use carbon capture where they're no longer emitting. And as a result, the net zero case has the fewest cumulative emissions of all three scenarios. And in addition to eliminating emissions, minimizing costs was one of our main goals. If we break down the costs as shown on the chart on the left, there's a clear trend where the fixed costs for generation, transmission, and distribution rise as we add more capacity, and these costs also make up the majority of our revenue requirement. The variable costs are influenced more by fuel choices. So BAU has the most variable costs because it's dependent on natural gas, and 100% renewables has the lowest variable cost as it's mainly using wind and solar with no fuel cost. But this scenario still has the highest overall cost because the fixed costs are dominating, and they are very high because we are overbuilding that wind and solar capacity to meet the load at every hour. If we break down if we show the average electricity rate on the table on the left, we can see BAU is clearly the cheapest, but of course this doesn't account for the external costs of pollution, climate change, and unchecked fossil fuel extraction. The net zero case provides a pretty good result. It's a very similar rate to our existing system, while 100% renewables does increase the cost by over a cent per kilowatt, even though this scenario is impacted more by hydrogen production, which we'll explore in detail now. So hydrogen production is viable for Arizona Public Service. It reduces the curtailment of our renewable energy, and it reduces our overall costs. Based on the cost to build and operate the electrolyzer that's producing hydrogen, the production cost is about $15 per million BTU, which is roughly 1/3 the cost to produce green hydrogen today. Hydrogen production isn't a large part of the net zero scenario, but you can see in the center column on that table, it does have a noticeable impact on the curtailment and the overall cost. There is a much larger opportunity for hydrogen production in 100% renewables. It lowers the cost by about 0.7 cents per kilowatt hour, which will definitely build up over time for ratepayers. In addition, it's reducing an untenable amount of curtailment to a much better level. And as we produce more hydrogen, the share of it in our hybrid fuel plant increases. And this not only reduces our costs, but it also reduces the amount of biogas we have to purchase. And this is good economy-wide because this biogas can go to other sectors that are hard to decarbonize, like shipping, aviation, industry, and it's a fuel that they can more easily use. And I'll now pass it back to Jenna to discuss our sensitivity on heat mitigation.